Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming to our panel, the 4-day work week. We did it, what now? We're super excited to share all the details of our 4-day work weeks and how that went for each of us. We're 4 very different studios. We're all working on very different things and have all had our different successes, challenges, and ways that we went about our 4-day work week. So this panel is really just an introduction, starting point, a way to think about the 4-day formula, what has worked, not worked, things you may be considering for your own studios, and exposing all of the whens, whys, and hows of operating every week like it's a 3-day weekend. So with that in mind, I'll introduce myself, and then I will let the panel introduce themselves as well. My name is John Cooney. I go by he and him pronouns. I'm the CEO of Armor Games, which is a full remote 11-person studio. We started 15-something years ago as a Flash Games website, and now we're predominantly a publisher for indies and small teams. We're working on games like Bear and Breakfast and Snacko and Spirit and the Mouse. We moved to a 4-day work week last October, and we structured it as a 32-hour work week with Fridays becoming part of the weekend. So I'm happy to moderate the panel. I'm going to chime in on some things, but I'm mostly going to try to let our other panelists speak the most. So let's just roll down the list in order, starting with Salim.
Hey everyone, my name is Salim Dabbous. I'm the co-founder of Co-op, which is a worker-owned game studio, and it's also a cooperative. We're actually celebrating our 10th birthday in 2 months. I'm really, really excited and proud about that. And we started with our 4-day work week in 2020, and then went back to 5 days just to kind of feel it out. And then we're like, oh yeah, 4 days is where it's at, and permanently made the switch last year. That's me.
Great. And Tanya?
Hi, I'm Tanya Short, and I'm the captain, CEO, director of Kitbox Games. We're 11 people based in Montreal. We released Boyfriend Engine and Moon Hunters, and we're working on some secrets. And we've also done some publishing. So we're probably best known as the publishers of the upcoming graphical Dwarf Fortress, but feel free to also look up Paparazzi, 6 Ages, and other things. We went to 4 days, 32 hours, starting last June. In the run-up to the launch of Boyfriend Dungeon, we decided that that was the best way to have a sustainable pressure as launch was coming up. And it was almost impossible to go back to 5 days. We briefly discussed it, but nobody wanted to even try. So it looks like we're 4 days at the very least until the pandemic is actually over, but probably forever.
Great. And finally, Chris.
Yes, my name is Christopher Chancey. I am the founder and CEO of Man Avoid Entertainment, a studio based out of Montreal. It's about 36 people now. Amongst other things, we've recently released Rainbow Billy, The Curse of the Leviathan. We're on the 4-day week since 2019. So, it was really part of our core values as a studio to have a no crunch culture and to try and give the best advantages to our staff. And so we implemented it pretty early, and it's been going great. We've never went back to the 5-day since then. Much like John, we're on the 32-hour week with Fridays off.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone on the panel. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. So we'll go back to just looking at our faces so you don't have to look at my presentation the whole time. And yeah, thank you, everyone who's come to our panel. This is very roughly structured, but the first part we're really going to focus on is thinking about how we planned and dreamed out our 4-day work week, what that kind of how we arrived at those moments. What did it look like? What did initial planning look like for our work weeks? And then after that, we'll move into more of some of our respective challenges, some of the things we found from moving through this process, things that changed along the way. And we'll end by talking about the future. Where do we see it fitting in with our studios in the future? Lasting impressions, thoughts about how the 4-day work week might fit into the larger indie space, but also the game industry as a whole. And then at the end, we'll have room for Q&A, so feel free to save any questions you might have for our panel. We're very happy to answer any questions that there might be towards the end. So thank you, everyone. Let's go ahead and start with how we got here and how we started. So the first question for the panel is really talking about, what prompted this change? Like what was the point at which you all decided that it was time to move and shift from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week? And maybe I'll just pick someone to start off with, and then we can start that conversation. So let's start with Salim.
Sure. So we started in the summer of 2020, and I don't know if you remember, but that was a pretty rough time. It was after the murder of George Floyd. We were going through pandemic. There was, a lot of stress on our team and on a personal level, just of like what was happening in the world, and we just felt like keeping our heads down and working throughout didn't feel right for us. We really wanted to be engaged in social movements. We really wanted to have more time to sort of engage with our families and our communities. And we felt like work was taking too much from us to be able to do that. And so that was where the conversation for 4-day work weeks began. It was a necessity for our well-being, our mental health, and our need to engage with what was happening around us, things that were just more important than, frankly, video games.
Yeah, I think I can chime in a little bit too, that we had talked about it for some years before we did it. And I had always felt that the humans making the games matter at least as much to me as, the business that is profiting from the game. So when it became very clear to me last summer that, giving bonus vacation days wasn't quite cutting it, giving various perks wasn't quite cutting it, this seemed like a way that we could give more buffer in a way to the human side of KitFox without losing, we could afford to risk the potential losses from that. And after we'd been enduring the pandemic for that long, and we were, like I said, we were running up to the launch of Boyfriend Dungeon, and I really needed people to not burn out, and I needed them to stay on after launch and really come with 100% of their health. It seemed like the best, at least temporary solution. And then we thought, well, why not continue?
Yeah, we implemented it in kind of a knee-jerk reaction to an article I had read when back in 2019, there was an article that came out of a study in Norway that it was all around focused hours of work. And basically the article was saying that, in a normal day on a 5-day week, a human being can only have about 4 to 4.5 hours of focused work. The rest of the time, you're a little bit distracted. You're on Facebook, you're talking with colleagues, wherever it is. And that they made a test, and with a 4-day work week, that 4 hours of focused work became 5 hours to 5.5 hours of focused work. And so in a sense, in 4 days, they felt like you could achieve as much as in 5 days because the amount of focused work didn't change. And so, from that, and also being in Montreal, there are a lot of studios here. And so it is a competitive landscape to, find staff, find senior talent and all of that stuff and bring them into the studio. And we were very much into already the idea of kind of trying to balance out work and life together and kind of redefine what it means to work in a 21st century. And so we decided to implement it at that time. And as I said, the reception immediately was, pretty crazy. So we decided to keep it.
That's awesome. And so as you were thinking about your switch over to this new work week, and as you were starting to plan things out, what were your expectations around, the fact that there was no longer going to be a Friday or whatever day you take off for the 4-day work week? Were you expecting productivity? I know, Chris, you talked about this a little bit. Were you expecting productivity to stay the same? Were you expecting productivity to drop, a full 20% because there's that less time? What were your expectations going into rolling this out for your teams?
our expectations were that we were going to probably lose a bit of efficiency in the short term. Like I feel like I'm very aware of what I don't know in life, and so I was approaching it with the humility of knowing that we were going to have some bumps down that road. And so we decided to implement it for 6 months before we even decided to kind of look at what the results were. We decided to kind of give ourselves a really solid period of time and not stress out about it too early. And so, yeah, we did expect some, some rough patches in the beginning. There was a little bit of a slowdown at the start. I think everyone was kind of getting into the groove. We can talk about this extensively, but probably in the next section, there's a lot of challenges that come with the 4-day work week that you need to be aware of, and we kind of hit those face first every time. But pretty quickly, I would say within 3 months, I feel like we had reached a level of efficiency that was similar to what we had in the past, just with much happier people. So it was a net positive for us.
Anyone else?
I had very minimal expectations. I wasn't really sure how things were going to play out. I had a feeling that mental health was going to improve, and then that was like a very drastic, obvious shift for us. So that was just really great. I think something that I was unsure of is our team had scaled up during the pandemic as a remote studio for the first time. And so there were a lot of members of our studio that were, people I've never worked with in person. And it definitely took a while to convince them that the 4-day work week was real. It just, when you're not a tight knit team and you have new members and they're just like, oh, you're saying I can take off on Friday? Like, are you sure? And we noticed a couple people who were just like not doing that, and that they're like, well, I can't finish my work if I don't continue working Fridays. And so something we didn't anticipate was just how we were assigning work, how we were tracking it, how much work was being assigned, and just a cultural level of providing safety to those newer team members who just started with us and were suddenly being told they're okay to take time off on Fridays. That was a bit of a surprise for us, that like need to kind of convince and make that feel safe for people.
Yeah, I know for us as a studio, one of the biggest things, and we're already segueing into the next section, but for us, one of the biggest things that I think we thought about and then ended up doing was framing it as a trial and really running with it as a trial. That way, when things were not if things weren't going to work, or if things were going really well, or whatever it was in between, that it was recognized that this is just a trial, that we're going to see if this fits us. And if it doesn't fit us, there's ways we can roll back or change or figure out. Giving ourselves the room to fail a little bit was really kind of critical in our planning, and something that helped alleviate a lot of the planning speed bumps that we were expecting, but didn't know were going to happen as we were moving along.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that our expectations were that productivity would slightly dip. I don't really believe that, maybe some of us on the team do work that can be properly quantified and like have productivity that's comparable to widgets, but I think most of us don't. I'm not even sure most of my tasks are focused work tasks, if it comes down to it. Like, I think I do a lot of loose brain chaos emails, and like that doesn't really need or create focus. But we were willing to, that's why I put it in terms of risk, rather than anything we felt was measurable. My expectation was more what Celine was talking about, the mental health would be a little bit more stable, that people would feel like more able to put in those 4 days if they knew that they would have the 3 days at the end. And so we expected to lose, I would say I expected to lose 5 to 10%, just because I think most people, most weeks check out Friday afternoons anyway. Like, even if they are doing work, probably it's not the most focused. So that was my baseline expectation.
I can just riff off of what John, you mentioned before. I think it's super important to leave yourself the room to fail at the 4-day work week as well. We implemented it with a concept that was, this is a privilege that, that everyone has now. But, if ever shit hits the fan, we could go back to the 5-day week for a period of time. If ever it doesn't work out for some reason, we could go back to the 5, allowing yourself and telling everyone that this is kind of a trial thing is an important, I think, aspect of it. And then the other thing for us that we had mentioned to everyone initially was just in the concept of work using the agile method. We're working on sprints with tasks and all of that stuff. And I think it is important to try and get some data out of it, velocity and trying to get the, an amount of hours that it takes to do a certain task. But, at the end of the day, I'm not asking people to log in hours. I'm asking them to deliver their task for the sprint. And so we were already in a dynamic with everyone on our team where we trust that, they're responsible for the work that they need to do. And, them understanding that this was the reasoning behind it was that we trusted them to be able to achieve what they needed to achieve within the 4 days instead of the 5. Also gave them the opportunity to decide if they wanted to work a few hours on the Friday, but maybe take the Thursday afternoon a little bit more, chill. It gave them the flexibility essentially to be able to kind of pick and choose when they felt more creative and when they felt more focused or when they felt more in a work mode. So I think that's also something that really worked out for us.
Thanks. And Chris, we can kind of move into like the next section talking about how we're measuring the things that we're doing. And thank you, Chris, for answering the questions on how you were measuring that success there. For Salim or Tanya, how are you measuring success for your team? How are you measuring whether or not the 4-day work week was working or not? Was it, productivity? Was it, general feel? How's everyone doing? Like, what were you using as like kind of the benchmarks for deciding if this was a fit for you?
Well, part of why I was dubious about measuring the productivity is, I think it's Goddhart's law. As soon as you make something a measure of success, it becomes a useless measure because people sometimes unconsciously, if I told them they have to do a certain number of points, well, I think they'll do that number of points. So I could go back and look at now historically, because it's not, a measure that everyone's striving for. There's no punishment attached to it. I could see what the productivity is. But realistically, we would take it off if people felt like they weren't making forward enough momentum, because that kills the morale of many game developers. If they can just feel like the project is stagnating and they're not moving forward. Now, what are the chances that it's the Friday that's the problem in that case? It seems pretty unlikely. Like they still have, a good number of hours to move a project forward. So maybe there's some other issue at that point. But yeah, it was more just, it was not measurable. It was really asking the team, like, what do we think is the benefit? Is it worth the fact that maybe we will take 10% more time to make our projects potentially? Is everyone okay with that? And then so far, everyone is. Cool.
How about you, Salim?
Yeah, I agree that there was a lot of a gut check feeling kind of thing going on. We did track, just for planning purposes, we're like, okay, well, this is how much velocity our programmers were hitting. This is how many points they were completing in a sprint. Let's see what it's like in 4 days. And then we found that there was kind of very little difference for us. Some weeks they were more productive, some weeks were less productive. It just kind of seemed to follow the same kind of cadence as a 5-day work week. And we also checked our art asset output and kind of found the exact same result as well. And so it was like, okay, well, on a productivity side, it's pretty much plus or minus within the standard expectations. So not much of a change there, which is great. And then we just conducted a bunch of interviews and anonymous feedback and one-on-ones about the 4-day work week to see how people were reacting to that. And it was pretty much, maybe this sounds obvious, but it was really positive across the board. And that was, and I mean, just like me personally, like I was dying during the time. Like I was fucking having a miserable time at work. I was really stressed out. I needed more time. And so like just me on a personal level, I could see the benefit to myself. And that was, co-op is it's a cooperative. So we vote on all of our policies, but I'm just here representing the studio as myself. And I could say easily that it had a significant impact on my mental health. And so that was enough, honestly, for tracking.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about mental health impact on your team, what you saw, like, especially as you were, going through your initial rollout into like people feeling comfortable. What were you seeing on your teams in terms of mental health? And were people coming fresh to work on Monday? Were they feeling like the more time is better? Was there anyone feeling anxiety from the fact that it's a shorter week? What were you seeing on your teams, especially through the early stages and going into the parts where you're starting to become comfortable?
I can speak to that anxiety element because that was definitely present for us in our first attempt at the 4-day work week, because we had, I would say, kind of poor production planning as well as a milestone around when that was happening. So for some people, they felt like because of that scenario, they felt like they couldn't as freely take that 4-day work week and had to do overtime, which we always track at Co-op and also pay out at 1.5x salary. So it was like, okay, if we're going to treat 4 days as the standard and the 5th day is overtime, we need to also track that. And so there was anxiety around milestones and finishing things, but I think those were really rooted in poor production practices, because when we revisited 4-day work week with a much stronger emphasis on smoothing out our production pipelines, that anxiety kind of went away pretty quickly.
Yeah, on our side, it's similar. I think a lot of our processes had to be reworked for the 4-day work week. But we did also do some interviews anonymously. Sent out surveys and stuff like that, and across the board, morale was up. And then I'm not sure what the stats are on this. I'd have to go back and check. But my gut feeling is there was a lot less absenteeism during the week. I think there's a lot of appointments that you need to do during the week because things are closed on the weekends, and then people are going to kind of pick and choose a moment in the week where they're going to do that thing. Now everyone knows that they have the Friday to do whatever that is, and so when they need to plan something in the week, they don't plan it on a Tuesday. They know that the Friday is off, so they'll just do whatever they need to do on the Friday. So the 4 days was really all hands on deck, a lot more than what we would see before. And I also feel like this might extend to just generally
recording stopped.
Generally, people taking sick days is also something that I think we saw less of. I think organically people just felt that they could be refreshed with the 3-day weekend, and then come out into the work week ready to work, basically.
Tanya, is there anything you wanted to add?
I mean, it was very popular. I don't think a single person ever complained. I know that there is a little bit of a rough bit, which I don't know if we're getting into all the concerns yet, but as far as mental health goes, for me and my community manager, we both have the kinds of things that might need us to respond over the weekend. For me, it's more like an urgent business partner email. For her, it's like a Discord fight breaks out, something like that. And so that's always been on our radar. Like, this doesn't really change that. I know one thing we've adjusted for her is she tends to leave a bit early Thursday afternoon, planning to do a bit on Friday, just because it helps break out that weekend silence. Because it's really hard to be away from social media for a whole 3 days. Like that's like an eternity in Twitter time. So I think initially her mental health, maybe it was harder because she was anxious about leaving it for 3 days. And now that we've worked out this system, she can leave it for the 2 days and feel better about it.
Yeah, we definitely had something similar to that, where especially with social media and partners, there was a lot of anxiety around that. I would say with partners, it's been a lot easier because people are like, "Are you available for a meeting on Friday?" I'll be like, "Nope, sorry, just no." I don't even say we don't work Fridays.
Same.
Say, I don't have availabilities. Sorry.
Exactly. I'm not available. I'm busy.
Yeah, exactly. So that has worked pretty well for us in terms of social media. Something that we've just kind of realized is that our team and community management in general is vastly undervalued in terms of resources. And so that actually brought up a really good conversation at our studio over the needs of community management, and that we were placing too much responsibility on one person to handle so much. And I think this is a common thread in a lot of community management roles. And so it actually forced us to hire up for that role so that we have two people in that and that they can alternate. And we also have paid volunteers for our Discord and our Twitter so that we can have people kind of keep eyes on things when core staff is not available, or it's a Friday and stuff. And that's like really helped, I think, spread the load instead of feeling like Twitter and Discord are all one person's responsibility and it's always turned on. We actually had really good conversations around boundaries around that. We also close our Discord during high traffic times in our marketing push. Like, we'll close our Discord from 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. or something so that people can't talk, so that even our mods can get some rest. And I think it just brought up a lot of conversations around the boundaries and needs for rest versus the expectations of things like community management, and how those were unfairly eating into people's personal time.
Yeah, I think I have to mention that, organically, the leads ended up still doing a small meeting on Friday mornings to kind of plan for the weeks ahead. And, we don't stop them from doing that. Like, as long as everyone is comfortable and they take those hours off on another day in the week or whatever, anyone that kind of wants to have the peace and quiet of not being bothered by the entire staff on a Friday, the leads do meet up. And admittedly, I don't really do the 4-day work week myself. I'm still in the rigmarole of trying to, make everything happen all the time with the company. So in that sense, like I'm not giving a good example of what the 4-day work week should be. I feel like everyone watching this should follow Salim and Tanya's example, not mine. Because, and we had this discussion with our leads, but it's important that people don't feel like they would need to work on a Friday to advance in the company or become a leader in the company, or kind of get ahead. So that was really, really important to kind of kill that vibe right away. And again, it just comes back to working on deliverables and making people understand that this is just what they do in their sprint. This is part of their tasks, and that whenever they decide to do them, the same for you. You could decide to work on the Friday if you wanted to, but we're not. Be it on the Friday or the Thursday, it doesn't matter to us.
I had one more note on mental health,
Sure.
which is I'm the first and so far only KitFox parent. But I have found having a day where my kid is in daycare and I don't have to work, like it's a massive mental health benefit that like all my friends who have young children who don't have Fridays off, like it seems like how do you get anything done? And they're like, I don't know. So I mean, I almost feel like it's something we should offer to all parents.
Yeah, I just to second that. Not working on Fridays for me. I have two young children who are 2 and 4 years old through the pandemic and everything, and one of the things that's been really important to me is being a part of their lives as much as I can. And what Fridays have done for me is, yes, the time away from them and having my own personal time for my own mental health has been really good. But I've also, every single Friday morning, I volunteer at my older daughter's preschool. And that's just been like one of the best things about the 4-day work week. It's not even work related at that point. It's just my time that I feel like I'm getting back, and it's only could happen unless I was taking every Friday morning off from work normally. So that was just really important and great for me. And speaking on like things that have been really good and beneficial, what are the benefits? What have you seen have been the major benefits for your studios moving to a 4-day work week? And what are the big things that you've seen? And what are the big picture things that you share when you want to talk about how great the 4-day work week is?
I mean, I feel like I've covered this, but for me, it's just like, it's a place I want to work at. It's a place I want to work at a lot more than I used to. And I think that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, me too.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Chris.
Oh, no problem. I think one thing that we noticed was, so we started it in 2019 before the pandemic. And I'm really proud that our retention rate was very close to 100% despite a worldwide pandemic in the past 3 years. I haven't lost anyone on the team, be it to mental health or, whatever reason. Like, everyone seems happy, so everyone is sticking around. Everyone seems healthy, so they're sticking around. We added a lot more during the pandemic to make sure that everyone was feeling good and everything. But still, I think the 4-day work week definitely helped everyone kind of be able to regroup, refocus, like talk with their families, do whatever they needed to do in those 3 days off. That maybe on a 5-day work week would have just added a lot to the stress level of the team. So retention, I think, is something, as a studio owner, is a huge advantage that we have versus other companies. And another thing I think is that our employees are kind of getting used to the 4-day work week as well. So I think it's going to be hard for them to find, that same lifestyle in another studio. And so that also plays into, trying again for us to have that best, work-life balance. I think studios that are going to offer that are going to have a unique retention level with their employees, and just generally have happier, healthier employees working for them. And honestly, in the end, people will make games. We need computers and brains. I keep saying this all the time, but I think it's really important to realize that our primary resource to make video games are human beings, and making sure those human beings feel as creative and as focused and as ready as possible to hit the ground running on a work day, I think is all positive things that you want to do.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know for our studio, just echoing a lot of what everyone's already said here, but I think the biggest thing that we saw is everyone would come to work on Monday with like stories to share of what they did over their weekend and what they had going on, and then just hit the ground running super hard. We saw that everyone felt like they were coming to work happy and refreshed. And I think for us, especially framing it within the pandemic, everyone at Armor Games was struggling really hard. And we were at a moment at the company where we realized we were just trying to get everyone to the level of just being okay. Like, okay was just the baseline we wanted to hit. Like, can we get people to work feeling okay? And I think the 4-day work week really helped us get beyond the okay bar and start moving towards like what is ideal? What is the ideal workplace, and what does that look like? And it really was that push for us, and I think everyone feels those benefits and feels a lot of the things that are positive and good about the 4-day work week. But on the other note too, there was a lot of things that challenged us as well at Armor Games, especially around certain disciplines had more trouble adjusting to a 4-day work week than others. What were some of your what were some of the things that you saw from your teams as you were rolling out the 4-day work week? Were there certain disciplines or certain groups that were more challenged? Was it the company as a whole that was working through certain things? Did it expose anything that you weren't seeing before from your studio? I know we went into some of this more or less with some of you, but I was just curious if there's anything else the group saw.
I'll start. Kitfox has always been very, I would say, efficient about our communication. We're very focused. We didn't have a lot of excess meetings to cancel or get rid of or anything like that. But I think we did have a situation where we believe in being professionally respectful is one of our pillars. And for us, what professionalism means is we have very, very synchronous work together as collaborators. We have core hours every day where everyone works at the same time together. And that's great. But in a 5-day week, I think that sort of normalized 9-to-5 working system, people sort of build in their own buffer where because there isn't the flexibility of the schedule itself, they build the flexibility in, if I'm not feeling that great on Tuesday, I'll do the hours, but it'll be Friday and then maybe to get my tasks done, I have Friday afternoon. And that kind of flexibility had to shift in favor of the employee's time and energy instead. So for me, for example, if I have a bad Tuesday, it's sort of bad to work on Friday, right? It's not when everybody's available. I can't collaborate with people properly on Friday. I can't necessarily make it up because people won't be there. And I still could, but it's overtime at that point. I'm working on the weekend, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so one thing that I'm trying to encourage with my employees is to think of, you can still do makeup Fridays, but but it's tough because like I said, like if your collaborators aren't there, if your team members aren't there, like it might not be a replacement for that Tuesday afternoon you missed. You might have to power through on Tuesday anyway, somehow. And how do you do that if you haven't slept? So it's sometimes it's still a struggle, I think, to try and really feel like every day you're putting in that good 25% of a week.
I think for us, we actually have a mix of asynchronous work that ends up working really well for when people use Fridays as a makeup day, where it's actually like, oh, great, there's no one here. That's perfect. If I take a Monday or Tuesday off and I work on a Friday, or I do Friday overtime, those are days where I'm just like so efficient because I can focus on all the tasks that I put off during the week, where I have to communicate with a lot of people, just because of the complexity and inefficiencies that we may have on our project. But we've also gotten our team is pretty distributed across different time zones and also have different needs: mental health, physical health, emotional health, etc. And so we still maintain a very flexible time off policy and like let people just kind of, take whatever time they need, even within the 4 days. I think it's really important to still provide that level of flexibility. And so we've gotten into a bit more of a culture of scheduled messages on Slack, asynchronous communication. And I think that those are really, really beneficial in general for remote work as well. And in a way that the 4-day work week has actually made that more normalized and easier for us.
Yeah, I know. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
I had an employee who said that he did not want to work the 4-day work week, and he absolutely wanted to work 5 days a week, which was a strange one to have to deal with, because again, I don't want to give him anything more than the others for working the extra day, because that defeats the purpose of the 4-day work week. But at the same time, I understand that a lot of people, have work as kind of their social life, and work is very melded together. And so do you stop someone from working on the 5th? So we ended up kind of, discussing it openly and kind of having the 5th day be more of like a paid, if he wants training, or if anyone wants training on a Friday and they want to kind of go through more schooling, or they want to go and like have this Udemy class that we buy for them or stuff like that. We're always open to doing that. And the Friday is kind of a moment for that. We had employees that wanted to do their own personal projects, which we encouraged them to do on the Friday. And so that even if they had questions or whatever during the Friday, like feel free to go on Discord and say whatever you need to say. But so that was a bit of a challenge to where, a lot of programmers told me actually that they didn't need the 3 days off, which was a strange one. I'm like, you're serious right now? You don't want to take the 3 days. You absolutely want to work the 5 days. So that was a weird one to deal with, but I think it's important to still stay the line of, not encouraging people to do the 5 days, because it would defeat the purpose of the 4-day week. The other thing that was kind of just an obvious one, but that you only kind of have to think about once you're in it, is how do you deal with holidays? Is it suddenly a 3-day work week when there are 8 weeks in Montreal where, during the year where there's a national holiday? And so we decided that we were going to stick to the 4-day work week, but when it's a holiday, you can decide to have that day. If it's a Monday, you can decide to have the Monday off and then work the Friday, or you can keep the Friday off as usual. But, there was discussions around that as well, it not being an issue, just being like, okay, well, logistically, what do we want to do with this situation? In my mind, again, it all comes back down to sticking to the sprint, sticking to the deliverables, no matter the number of days it takes you to do. That's kind of our expectation of work for the next 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the sprint size. And that's kind of how we ended up treating it. I don't know if Salim or Tanya, you have a different way to deal with holidays, or John?
Holidays has been a big back and forth for us as well. I think where we landed was a similar thing of like, yeah, either take the Monday or Friday, but also recognize, because we are removing a day and those holidays are kind of designed around a 5-day work week, to like that we need to sort of accommodate the fact that would maybe cut a lot of time off from our sprints and getting things done. I think it's kind of an open conversation at our studio, honestly. It's something that we might revisit.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure it out too. So far, we've just said sometimes it's a 3-day week. And that doesn't feel great as a product manager because typically we forget when we plan the sprint. I mean, if you remember when you're planning the sprint, then it's not as bad, but you still have to look at, well, how much would we get done if we added 2 more days or 3 more days, right? But I think one reason why we keep defaulting back to, well, it's just another day off is we have some people who are part-time in addition. So they're only working 3 days a week or 2 days a week. And they should have a day off too. And right. And it's like, well, if a 3-day-a-week person gets the day off, why don't I? Right. So then we're just like, well, I guess now you get off 60 days a year. It's 52 plus the 8 red days.
Yeah, I know for us, holidays have been like we've said before, like the moment you go from a 4-day work week to a 3-day work week, it gets really compressed. It gets really, it almost, in some ways, it becomes like you get to Wednesday and you're like, oh, that's it. Like it's really can be challenging. We decided to keep all of our holidays, but try to shift them in ways that made the best use of all the time that was available. But it does start to squeeze the calendar quite a bit. It does start to, especially when we start thinking of things like we're trying to plan, an offsite. A lot of us haven't actually met each other in person before. We haven't actually seen each other in 2 or 3 years. So as we're starting to plan that, we're also having to consider that as well, especially as a publisher with lots of publishing partners. We want to make sure that they're being taken care of as well. And that's always been like, yes, holidays and extra days off and those kinds of things have been really kind of a challenging thing. And I think something that we're all kind of speaking to on this panel is we're learning a lot of things in real time, and we are there's no guidebook on how to do a 4-day work week with in the games industry or as an indie or it's something where we kind of have to solve these things on our own and see if they fit, and all of our teams are different, so we all have to kind of fit it differently to our different needs.
It's worth noting that part of this conversation also started because so we had somebody at 3-day work, 3-day weeks and paid appropriately, like years and years before any of this. And they pointed out that legally they are still owed those 8 days, like it's in the laws of Quebec at least. But it'd be weird, to then give them time off and not everybody else.
Yeah, we had to do a surprising amount of research into US laws on how 40, like we just assume 40 hours is a full week of work. Yeah. And it's bizarre.
Well, technically we do pay those hours, by the way. I don't know if that's a different segment, I forget. But technically we have 40-hour weeks according to the government. It's just we have 8 hours of self-improvement or something is what it counts as.
Cool. Let's get into like the future of the 4-day work week. We're starting to run out of time, so I want to make sure we cover this topic. We all gave our various experiences on our 4-day work weeks. We're all very different studios, but I'm curious from this group, do you think that indie developers as a whole will be able to move in this direction and do this? Is this going to be a broader trend for the greater industry? Where do you see the difference between a 4-day and 5-day work week starting to shake out as more studios jump on board?
Huge question, dude.
Sorry.
I think it's kind of a strange one, but I think it's going to need a big cultural shift in just the way work is perceived in the general population for it to become something that's kind of normalized. I think, it's an arbitrary number to say that we should work 5 days a week. It could be 2, it could be 3. Who cares in the end, as long as you can live and be happy. I think also a lot more people are orienting their life. I think the pandemic has put a lot of different perspective on what it means to work and what it means to, be happy and at home and feel safe and secure and healthy. And I think people are maybe less career oriented now that, there's been a worldwide pandemic and everything's gone to shit in some fashion. I think a lot of people now might be saying, well, maybe I want to enjoy, an extra a day or 2 a week off so that I can take care of my family, do things that I enjoy, do things that I love. maybe sacrifice even some salary to do that. I think I know people that have gone from the AAA studios that have come into smaller studios that are on the 4-day week, or have decided to like chop their hours to do a 3-day week, even if they were making the huge salary with the AAAs. And, I think we're going to see more and more people trying to go down that lifestyle route instead of like the career, money route. And I think that's a good thing in general. And if more and more people start doing that, then I think it's going to get more normalized and you will see more studios doing it. I think it is another beast for a AAA studio to tackle a 4-day week than it is an indie studio. Just the sheer scale and coordination of like a 400-person team working on a game. I don't know how that would work. But I think for indies, I expect that it's going to be like more and more regular to see studios on the 4-day work week.
Yeah, to speak back to something that Chris mentioned in terms of, hiring people and attracting talent, that is one of the main things that small studios can offer. I can't imagine that this won't become the norm in the future. And I think it should become the norm. I don't see any reason for it not to be. And part of that is retaining talent, attracting talent, because, as small companies, we don't compete with the big studios in terms of salary or benefits or whatever. So we have to find other ways to engage people in meaningful ways and make our work environments attractive for them.
Honestly, and maybe this is the pandemic, like existentialism speaking a little bit, but I think that if there was a will, any industry out there could go to 40 hours a week. It's more a matter of everyone wanting to do it. Like I think if all of the employees of Ubisoft woke up tomorrow and said, we only want to work 4 days or we quit, like suddenly it would be, they'd figure it out. Right. Well, and that's like the magic of unions and co-ops and all these other like worker forces. It would be very, very difficult. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying if I know that it would be even, exponentially harder, the larger your organization is. Hats off to Chris already for 30 people versus 11. But I absolutely think it'll become more and more normal. And I hope it does. And I hope the most for our most vulnerable workers, for like QA and community management and all the people that are exploited more, that they get to have more and more the kind of lifestyle that they want for their talents. Sorry, Salim, you were gonna say something in the middle and I kept talking.
No. I forgot what I was gonna say.
Sorry.
Cool. So let's just wrap up and then we can go to Q&A. But the last question I wanted to ask the group, if there was just one thing that you'd recommend to any team considering a 4-day work week, whether it's a piece of advice, a thing that you keep thinking about, what's that one thing that you would give to that group who is thinking about that 4-day work week shift?
Every single time that I run a postmortem in life, the one issue that keeps coming back in again and again is communication. There's always issues with communication in some form. And so I think that's one thing that you really, really need to work on. So, optimizing meetings and making sure there's a flow of communications from when things get decided to whoever needs to know those things, and not necessarily monopolizing everyone's time for meetings is something that's really important. Also, going into a meeting with a schedule instead of just with already talking points that are pre-planned, instead of kind of just winging it.
That's a big one.
Which is what we used to do, I think is really, really important, because in the end, you realize that and on a 5-day week, you were kind of already cheating on a lot of stuff, like, cheating hours here and there with, I'm going to attend this meeting, even though I have nothing to do with it, just because I wanted to see or understand what's going on, knowing that it was kind of going to be like a more relaxed hour where you might not need to have a brain as focused as you usually do. So that's the kind of stuff that I think really needs to get worked on. The asynchronous communication also, like as Tanya mentioned, it can be an issue if someone's not there on a certain day, or all of that stuff are the things that we needed to figure out. But if you do put the time in that and you can fix that part of it, the rest comes a lot much more naturally and easier than you might think to implement.
Salim, Tanya?
Yeah, I would say if you're a team considering the 4-day work week, the most important thing I would suggest to you is to consider unionizing. If you're a group of team members, you should build collective power, because you can't trust people like us who are giving this talk right now as business owners. You know, we might be nice bosses, we might be good people, but there's nothing stopping us from reverting that or changing things or exploiting in other ways. And so the 4-day work week is a great place to actually start organizing your workplace, because it's a really easy place to unify a lot of things where you can be like, yeah, I would love that, and my team would love that. And that's a place where you find common ground to building solidarity. So I really recommend reaching out to organizations like Game Workers Unite and other union organizations on how to unionize, because then you can take some of that power into the team's hand and enforce and ensure proper boundaries and good work-life balance in a way that you can't by just trusting the owners of a studio.
Well put. My number one advice to both the bosses who are listening and the workers is to set a goal for yourself. If you're a boss, like, know what your goals are. Like, for us, if our goals were mental health, that's something we can look at and measure whether or not we should continue. And it was successful for us, so we continued. But and as a worker, like, what are your goals for those Fridays? Are you going to use them to relax? Are you going to use them to have a side project? Like, I think everybody feels better about it when they know what their goals are for a change like this, and see the results through that lens, rather than after 6 weeks trying to look back and remember how it felt before.
Awesome. Well, thank you all on the panel. I think we have about 9 minutes for Q&A. Is there anyone who wants to ask any questions for our panel?
KitFox might be hiring a programmer in the coming year or so, if anyone wants to ask about that. I don't have any details yet, but keep an eye on our Twitter and website. It is hard to hire programmers, I hear. So I'm hoping this will be a benefit.
Okay. You hear me? I think I have actually a few questions. First of all, is about the leading people, because there are usually people who are very focused and efficient, and at the same time you work with people who are not very efficient and have some problems with time organization. And how do you deal with that? Where are the traps? How do you deal with both attitudes? And how did they people switch to the 4 days week?
I mean, I can say for us, that has always been the case, right? Like on a 5-day week, there are some people who flail with their time organization and other people who are very good at it. And it's always a question of working with each person. Like I'm not going to have the same system that works for everybody. Some people, I got to remind them about their timesheets every 2 days. And other people, I leave them alone for 2 weeks and they come back with more spreadsheets than I could have imagined. And this does make it more evident, but I think if you're worried about someone not working hard enough, like, that's a separate conversation from how many hours you expect them to work.
Yeah, something to add to that is you can always help enable people to be better with those things, but also production needs to also be flexible enough to not treat every person as one size fits all. And sometimes production actually has to just measure that different people have different outputs, and you plan around that. So yes, you give them support, you help them have the tools to improve where you think it's necessary, but also production, you can't just have like an artist and be like, well, I need you to make, 15 assets a week. And if the artist can only make 7 assets a week, that's their pace. You have to plan around that. I think it's very important to not treat people as to just really not treat folks with a one size fits all approach.
Yeah, and always giving feedback is also something that I think is super important, and having that open conversation when you feel like someone might be underperforming or stuff like that, are just like general things. But again, those are issues that are as real on a 5-day week than as they are on a 4-day week.
Okay, another question is about scaling it, because you work in these studios. Do you think, or do you feel that it can be scaled to bigger studios? What are the possible traps there? And Do you have anything to recommend?
I guess I would recommend trialing it in the most isolated department. I worked at a large studio many years ago, so it's been a while. But I imagine the more tightly integrated and the more cross collaborative they are, the harder that department will be to trial a 4-day week. And doing it across the studio would probably be a complete problem. So yeah, maybe there's a particularly segregated group that can do a milestone on 4-day weeks and then compare notes.
What is the trial period?
For us, we started with 6 weeks and then we moved it to 3 months. So we doubled it after 6 weeks were successful. But I guess it would depend on the kind of milestones that project has. I'd be happy to talk with somebody in more depth. If you want to email me or tweet at me, we can organize a chat. I can give some advice.
I've never worked in a AAA studio, so I'm not really equipped to answer that question. I know that in Montreal, Eidos Square Enix is looking at trying the 4-day week, or they're implementing it in some form. So, you know, I would maybe reach out to them and see how they do it, but I don't have enough knowledge of the AAA space to be able to add anything.
Okay, and last question, I would like to ask about Agile. Do you work in Agile system? If so, please elaborate on, did you squeeze all these meetings? This is pretty expensive, you have planning, refinement, then you have to summarize all this up. And 4-day weeks seems to be pretty short to do all these things. How long your sprint lasts?
So before you answer, we have 3 more people with questions.
This is last one.
So if you could keep the answer brief,
Yeah.
people. We can run over a little bit, and hopefully you were here at the beginning to get their contact info, and if not, we'll put it up at the end.
Can I take this one for real quick? I don't think Agile is designed for video games. I think you have to take Agile and make it work for video games. There are elements of Agile that you take and implement, but you cannot get away from waterfall elements as well. I think you design the systems for your particular games and teams. You don't just adhere to Agile blindly or religiously. And that's how you make it work with the times and the constraints that you have.
For what it's worth, we do 2-week sprints, and yeah, Salim is correct. It's customized, but we do cross department show off, and then sprint review, and then sprint planning on Wednesday mornings every 2 weeks, and the total is about 2 hours. It's very unusual that it lasts more than 2 hours total.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much for the talk. I wanted to come back to a point. I think Salim, you mentioned you had to hire another person for your community manager because they were, there was so much focus on that one person. How do you have that conversation with that person without making them to feel like they're not doing enough, or like that you're trying to replace them? Because I can see how that can easily feel like you're being replaced. Like, oh, we're hiring another person just to help you with your work. Don't worry about it. So how do you have that conversation that is meaningful?
Yeah. Well, so at Co-op, the core full-time team members are co-owners of the studio. So there's a level of job security that I think already kind of brings in. In our particular case, actually, our community manager was the person who was like, this is insane, this is not fair, and this is too much. And so that was a reaction to them bringing up their need for help. But in other situations where we've noticed people need additional support, it's kind of just like, hey, this is something we're noticing. We think you need support. And if that's a threat or a problem or a fear for them, then it's just a matter of having a conversation, being like, let's lay it all down on the table and talk this out, and just be mature about it. And I do think being a co-op helps in a lot of ways towards that feeling of that fear of being replaced.
Yeah, I know for us, one of the things that we do as a publisher is we do internal QA for our games, and we found that QA didn't kind of get the same kind of productivity boost that some of the other pieces of our publishing program did. And so it became a conversation that got surfaced by the QA team that like, hey, like we're falling short. We're not falling short 20%, but we are definitely falling short on QA cycles. And yeah, it's something your team needs to be trusted to bring those things up and be able to respond to it.
In fact, if your team member is not highlighting those problems, I would want to ask why. I would dig into why that's not being surfaced to you, what is actually scaring them, and solving for that.
Thank you so much.
Hi. I'm curious, some of you mentioned pushback from your studio members about not wanting to go to 4 weeks, especially programmers. Can you dive into some of the reasons they specified and how you mitigated?
I feel like I'm part of this crowd, so I'm gonna like venture a guess as to why. We didn't, go delve into too much of it, but my understanding is a lot of people come into the industry with a chip on their shoulder, wanting to become the best at their craft, the best at what they do, and they understand that they need to put the practice hours in to be able to do that. When you have that competitive mindset, or you have that drive, it's hard to stop someone from wanting to learn everything about the world, So I think it was mostly that kind of issue. I think programmers might be a more competitive field in particular. I don't know why. I don't know if it's ingrained at school. I don't know where it comes from. But I think that's part of where it comes from. It's just that drive of wanting to be the best that made them want to work the extra time in. And then it's just having a conversation with them of making sure that it's a healthy it's a healthy thing that they're doing. I was always that driven. I'm a very competitive person. So I have that instinct in me, and I understand that I do work more hours than a general person might in general. That's why I started my company, and I decided to do what I did. But I'm very fulfilled in life. I'm very happy. I have a wife. I have a very balanced, social life, and I think that's the important thing. So you might want to, you don't want to discourage necessarily people from wanting to learn, but you do just need to track and make sure it's for the right reasons. That would just be my take.
Yeah. In our situation, the pushback actually came from people who were using work as a coping mechanism for the pandemic. And so when that kind of feedback came back to us, it was like, well, let's discuss that. Is that really the best path forward for you? Are there other solutions to find other ways to cope? Because I personally don't believe using work as a coping mechanism for the pandemic is healthy, because in the long run, once things change, if they change, you're left with nothing, no support network. You put all your resources into work and you're kind of fucked and alone at the end and have very little to show for it. So it was a matter of just really pushing back against that very strongly.
Got it. So people just need therapy. Thanks.
That's generally a very common piece of advice that we give our team.
Very quickly, so a lot of the criticism of the 4-day work week comes from the angle of sort of like, oh, like the benefits are temporary because once people become acclimated to it, they're less excited about it, like that sort of thing. I know stretching on 2 or 3 years, maybe some of your fears around that have been alleviated, but could you talk a little bit about that and maybe some alternative schedules, such as like summer hours, like 3 days a week during like the summer, or taking Augusts off, or things like that?
I can say that we also give 5 days a week, 5 weeks a year of vacation. If you've been at KidFox for at least a year, and 4 weeks for the first year. So you can already take August off. But I mean, honestly, I went into this with the full expectation that people would normalize to it. And I think that they have at this point. Like, we're almost to 1 year. And I think that's okay. Like, if this is their idea of normal, like, we've actually won. Like, we've improved their expectations of what work and life should feel like and how happy they should be as a baseline, even in a difficult world situation. And so, like, yes, I actually think that the biggest problem with these bigger companies is that because I think the benefits are immeasurable, and because they're human oriented, and because maybe, yeah, it does mean that some departments especially are going to be 5 to 10% less productive. It really has to come from the workers to fight for this kind of thing, because in the long run, it is probably a profit loss, and somebody has to say that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's a win-win, because anything that challenges the dominance of work in our lives is for the best. So if that's being normalized and so on, then I think that that's just a good thing.
Might also be unique to Montreal, but there's a lot of video game studios as well. So, you know, people talk. So even though they might get acclimated to the 4-day work week, I think, you know, speaking with other studios and understanding that they have something that other studios might not have that makes their life easier, still makes it feel like it's something that's worthy or something that has value. It's not like they suddenly stop caring the fact that they have that extra day.
I'm starting to hear about like board game meetings and D&D meetings and like movie goers that are like all 4-day work week people. And so like maybe that will help.
Yeah, every single time I get to Thursday night or Friday, I'm just like, oh, thank God. Like, thank God. It never gets old. It just never gets old. It always feels good to get to Thursday, or sorry, to get to Friday. So yeah, for sure. I think that's all the time we have for the panel. Thank you everyone in San Francisco who came to see us, or thank you if you're watching this on the Vault or YouTube or wherever this video might be in the future. Appreciate everyone's questions. Appreciate the panel being here and sharing their topics. And thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.